on the 10th of September, 1939, with the last Polish command bunker at Wizna surrounded. Captain Władysław Raginis ordered his surviving men to surrender. Then he stayed behind and detonated a grenade. This is what it had come to after 3 days of fighting against an army of around 40,000. Roughly 720 Polish defenders, 40,000 German troops with tanks, artillery, and aircraft. A 9-kilometer defensive line that had not even been completed when the invasion began. The position should not have held for an hour. It held for 3 days. How was this possible? Between two rivers and miles of marshland, the terrain narrowed the main German advance towards a single vital causeway and road. That passage was what Raginis had been ordered to defend. And before the battle began, he had made a promise. He would not leave his position alive. A quick note before we continue. Wizna is sometimes called the Polish Thermopylae, and like Thermopylae, the story has grown considerably in the telling. Where the evidence is clear, I'll say so. Where it is disputed or exaggerated, I'll say that too. The documented facts are already extraordinary enough. Section 1. The road through the marshes. The Second World War had begun only days earlier. On September 1st, 1939, German forces invaded Poland from several directions. In the north, Polish commanders tried to build a defensive line around the Narew and Biberza rivers. One of the most important crossing points was near the small town of Wizna. The rivers were surrounded by wide areas of wet, difficult marshland. Heavy vehicles could not simply spread out and drive through wherever they wanted. A raised road crossed the marshes and continued east towards Białystok. If German armored units broke through there, the route deeper into eastern Poland would be open. That was why the position mattered. The Wizna sector stretched for around 9 kilometers. It was divided into two main areas, one to the north and another around Strękowa Góra to the south. Between them ran the raised road through the marsh. On paper, it looked like a serious defensive line. In reality, it was unfinished. Construction had only begun in the spring of 1939. By September, the position included heavy concrete bunkers, smaller shelters, trenches, barbed wire, and anti-tank obstacles. But several parts were incomplete. Some shelters had not been properly hidden. One heavy bunker was missing its armored turret. There were no radio links between most positions, and the shelters had no proper ventilation. That last problem would become brutal once the guns started firing. The defenders also had no reserve force waiting behind them. If one bunker fell, there was almost nobody available to take it back. Section 2. The man in command. The officer responsible for this line was Captain Władysław Raginis. He was 31 years old and had spent most of his adult life in the Polish army. He had trained as an infantry officer, served as an instructor, and joined the Border Protection Corps shortly before the war. Raginis commanded from a bunker on the high ground at Strękowa Góra. From there he could see much of the sector, but he could not easily communicate with all of it. His artillery officer was Lieutenant Stanisław Brykowski. Later accounts say the two men made an oath that they would not abandon the position alive. The exact words are difficult to prove, but the promise became central to how the battle was remembered. The size of the Polish force also needs explaining. 720 is the number most often repeated, although one modern estimate places it below 650. Around half were assigned to the bunkers themselves, with the others spread through trenches, artillery positions, and supporting units. Their weapons included 6 old field guns, heavy and light machine guns, ordinary rifles, and only a tiny number of anti-tank rifles. Against tanks, aircraft, and heavy artillery, this was not an encouraging inventory. Against them was General Heinz Guderian's 19th Army Corps, usually estimated at between 32 and 42,000 men, with armored and motorized formations. That does not mean 40,000 soldiers all attacked the bunkers at once. Many belonged to the wider corps and were moving through the area. But the difference in strength was still enormous, and the Germans could bring tanks, heavy guns, and aircraft against positions with almost no effective anti-tank support. Section 3. First contact. German reconnaissance troops reached the area on September 7th. Their first goal was to capture the bridge across the Narew before the Poles could destroy it. They arrived too late. The Polish defenders blew the bridge, forcing the Germans to pause and prepare a crossing. The next day, German units studied the position and moved artillery into place. Shells began falling around the shelters as the guns searched for their range. The westernmost light positions came under especially heavy pressure. After dark, some of their defenders abandoned them. The main concrete line still held, but the Germans were now close enough to see what stood in their way. On September 9th, Guderian arrived and ordered the attack to be pushed forward. At around 10 in the morning, the real bombardment began. Artillery hammered the bunkers. Aircraft attacked from above. Smoke and dust covered the marshland. The Polish field guns tried to answer, but they were badly outmatched. Brakalski was killed, Raginis was wounded, and the Polish artillery was eventually silenced. Then, the infantry and tanks moved in. Section 4. A battle fought bunker by bunker. The bunkers had been placed so that their side-mounted machine guns could protect one another. That made a direct attack dangerous. A German unit approaching one shelter could suddenly come under fire from another position farther along the line. The marshy ground also restricted where vehicles could move. For a time, the system worked. Polish machine gun crews fired from the bunkers while riflemen fought from nearby trenches. German troops were forced to stop, find the firing points, and bring tanks, artillery, or engineers close enough to deal with them. But the shelters had serious weaknesses. Without ventilation, smoke and fumes built up inside. The air became hot and difficult to breathe. Some crews had to leave the protection of the concrete and continue fighting from open trenches. To the north, the Guchen part of the line began to collapse during the afternoon. At around 4 o'clock, Raginis radioed his commanders. He reported that the German advantage was overwhelming, but said he would continue defending the sector. Soon afterwards, his only radio was destroyed. From that point on, the remaining bunkers were effectively alone. By the evening, German formations had broken through parts of the line and were already moving farther east. This is an important detail. The entire German corps was not held motionless until the final bunker fell. But individual Polish positions continued fighting after the main advance had passed them. That turned the battle into a series of small sieges. German accounts describe bunkers continuing to resist even after their machine guns had been damaged and their entrances blasted open. At one shelter near Krupiki, engineers reportedly had to climb onto the roof and throw grenades through an opening before the firing finally stopped. Another position was only silenced when a shell passed through a firing slit and exploded inside. There was no safe withdrawal route linking the bunkers. Each crew fought with whatever ammunition remained, while the sounds of resistance from the neighboring positions gradually disappeared. Section 5. The Final Night. Fighting continued through the night of September 9th. One by one, the shelters around Malisevo and Strenkova Gora were surrounded and destroyed, or forced to surrender. Inside Raginis' command bunker, the surviving defenders were exhausted. The captain was wounded. Ammunition was almost gone, and help was not coming. A Polish relief force was moving towards the area, but it would not arrive until September 11th, one day too late. By the morning of the 10th, Raginis' bunker was the last major position still resisting. The exact details of the final minutes come from later accounts and are not perfectly documented. The accepted version is that Raginis ordered the remaining men to leave and surrender rather than die inside the shelter. Some accounts say the Germans threatened to kill Polish prisoners if resistance continued, but that detail is less certain and should be treated cautiously. What is clear is that Raginis stayed behind. Having promised not to abandon the position alive, he killed himself with a grenade. The Battle of Wizna was over. What did the defense achieve? Militarily, the Germans won. The road was opened, the defensive sector was destroyed, and Guderian's corps continued deeper into Poland. Most of the defenders were killed. Around 40 are often reported to have been captured, while a small number escaped and reached other Polish units. Exact casualty totals on both sides remain uncertain. Claims that the defenders destroyed dozens of tanks or killed thousands of Germans are often repeated online. but reliable evidence for those numbers is weak. The real achievement does not need those additions. A badly outnumbered force, spread across an unfinished line with almost no anti-tank power, forced a modern armored corps to stop, deploy its artillery and aircraft, cross a destroyed bridge, and reduce the remaining shelters one by one. The defense delayed part of the German movement and gave other Polish units more time to withdraw, although historians disagree about how much the delay changed the wider campaign. Poland was already being attacked across a huge front. No stand at Wizna could reverse that. But for the soldiers inside those bunkers, the task had never been to win the war. It was to hold the crossing for as long as they could. Section 6. The Polish Thermopylae. After the war, Wizna became known as the Polish Thermopylae. The comparison is easy to understand. A tiny defending force, narrow terrain, overwhelming odds, and a commander who chose death rather than surrender. But the comparison can also hide the real story. The famous number of 42,000 describes the strength of Guderian's wider corps, not 42,000 men attacking the same bunker at the same moment. The figure of 720 defenders is also an estimate, not a perfect count. And the fighting is sometimes described as a clean 3-day stand. Even though the first clash occurred on September 7th, the bombardment grew on the 8th, and the main assault took place across the 9th and 10th. None of that makes the battle less remarkable. It makes it human. The defenders were not mythical warriors in a perfect fortress. They were tired soldiers inside unfinished concrete shelters, losing contact with one another, breathing smoke-filled air, and watching each neighboring position fall silent. For decades, the exact location of Raginis' burial was unknown. In 2011, his remains were identified and reburied in the ruins of his command bunker at Strękowa Góra. The following year, he was promoted after death to the rank of major. Today, the broken shelter still stands above the marshes. It is not a monument to a battle Poland won. It is a reminder that sometimes the outcome is already certain, and courage is measured by what people choose to do before it arrives. The position at Wizna fell, but it did not fall quickly and it did not fall quietly. If you enjoy history's most unbelievable true stories, subscribe to No Ordinary History for more.